Hi all, Raidwald here. This is my response to Justicar's part 2 video of his taxation equals theft rebuttal. So, let's go ahead and dive in here.
So it's been 3 or 4 days since I uploaded my video on taxation equals theft, and if you stick around towards the end of this video, I'm going to give the response to that video. It does actually have a rebuttal.
Isn't it a bit dishonest to put forward an argument you yourself do not believe in? I don't know, just asking.
I'll give that to the anarcho-capitalists to help them out, but before I do that for you guys, I have a couple of rude words to say to you.
Alright, let's poison them wells.
And something about my process in debate. When I open up a debate with someone, I don't start with the strongest arguments that I can sustain. I try to start with the absolute weakest argument that I can sustain that is capable of proving the motion, or at least that I think is capable of supporting the motion I'm trying to propose. This is a strategic move on my part. It allows me to get a good handle on the intellectual heft of my opposition. You anarcho-capitalists, without a single exception, were spectacularly unimpressive.
Somebody's poisoned the water hole!
Sorry, I had no reason whatever to retreat from that argument and have to fall back to a stronger argument. And I'm going to try to explain why that is before I give you the rebuttal to that argument. By the way, the rebuttal's not without a response to it too, but...
I get it. So you're disappointed that we didn't give you the rebuttal you were looking for, because that rebuttal would have led to another rebuttal you could give. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's keep going.
Anyway, for my purposes here, there are 3 distinct phases in a contract life. You have the bargaining and acceptance phase, is where you hash out the terms of it, and one side agrees, the other side agrees, all that other stuff, perhaps consideration, whatever. And then you have performance subsequent to the terms of the contract. So each party to the contract is starting to fulfill its obligations that it agreed to in Part A. And then you have Part C. What happens if one of the parties defaults or reneges on this contract? How will it be resolved? It could be arbitration, it could be mediation, it could be all kinds of things that could come about. In my previous video, I was talking about Part A, the acceptance of the terms of the contract. You anarcho-capitalist type idiots were adverting to Part C to invalidate the anterior step.
Okay. First, let's start with the fact that you initiated this debate. Out of nowhere, there was no formal debate set up with a moderator and a predetermined terms or anything like that. So you had the privilege and the responsibility of setting forth the universe of discourse and defining your terms however you wanted. You could have defined any set of terms, any universe of discourse. You could have set this debate down any path you chose, and you failed to sufficiently do so, apparently. Because if what you were talking about was not understood by any of your opponents, then you have to assume that was a failing on your part, not on theirs. The contracts you base your entire argument around in that video are really the contracts between a customer and a retailer. Where the government comes in is when the retailer sets up shop. If there's consent to the government, it's the consent coerced out of a business by the government saying, pay us this protection money, or you will not do business. Not here. Not on our turf. And the consequence to not doing business on this turf is either move, right, or starve to death. So, ultimately, that's where the coercion comes in. The government gives you the choice between being productive and surviving, or being unproductive and dying, or relying on those who are productive. And even moving comes at a cost, for which you need money, for which you need to be productive, for which you need to pay your protection money, or die. And I suppose there's one other option. You could set up shop, selling something, a good or a service, without the government's permission, and without paying taxes to them. What would the consequence of that be? Justicar? Do you think the government would let that one slip? Or would they step in and crush you? Moving on, I'm going to assume, because you didn't actually quote any of your opponents, or the context in which they gave those quotes, but I'm going to assume that your assumption that they immediately went to Part C is because they were talking about the use of coercive force by the government. This is just an assumption on my part, but I feel like it's a fairly safe assumption to make. How is it that you know for certain, since you never laid out that you were talking about different phases or stages of contract life, and therefore their responses were not likely to have come in regards or in terms of your 3 stages of contract life? You're assuming that they're talking about the use of coercive force by the government in stage C, right? Whereas any libertarian out there would likely complain about the use of coercive force in Part A, right? You're ignoring the fact that violence could be used to force acceptance of a contract. And I don't think you'd be willing to accept that as a legitimate contract, even yourself. So before we jump into anything else, really, you have made the claim that a contract exists. This contract is between government and all of those whom the government... You need to... And I called you out on this in your first video, in fact. If you are going to make that claim, you need to back that claim up. You have a burden of proof for that positive claim that a contract exists. So I need you to define for me what that contract is, where it can be found, how it's, and a reasonable means for me to understand its terms and its conditions. I need you to point out exactly when and where I accepted this contract, or any other individual, or all individuals in this society accepted this contract. And it should go without saying here that we are talking about informed, uncoerced, entirely voluntary consent of one who is of reasonable age to consent to such a thing. Again, prior to any force or coercion being placed upon them. And I need to point to any other contract, private contracts, which are considered legitimate, which were accepted, performed, and enforced in a similar manner to the contract between the government and the governed, so that we can know, just for example, that it is a legitimate contract, one we would accept as legitimate between any 2 parties in any other given circumstances. Then, in order to really make your case that taxation is not theft, I need you to prove that such a similar contract could not be considered to exist between a thief and their victim. Alright, so let's go ahead and stop there, and we'll move on with the rest of what you want to say here.
And that's what's problematic when you're talking about coercion, threats of violence, use of force, threats of force, things of that nature. That's what coercion is. Coercion is not simply exploiting, fortuitous states of affairs for one of the bargaining parties. It is using or threatening to use force so that way the person doesn't have a choice but to agree to it or have bodily injury done to them. That doesn't arise when the bodily injury that might come about is just part of the enforcement provision that you agreed to.
Holy crap, really? Okay, so your opponents use the word coercion, I'm assuming, again, because you don't actually quote anybody. But you directly use the term coercion here, which leads me to believe that such an assumption is, again, a safe assumption for me to use. That your opponents used the term coercion, and you immediately assumed that they were referring to Part C, and not to Part A. Let's just set aside for the moment how convenient of an assumption it is for you to make right here about your opponents, and look into the fact that you right here are saying that the term itself, coercion, refers to force being applied at the beginning of contract life to force someone to accept it. You understand that, and yet when your opponents use that very same term for that very same meaning, rather than saying, oh, well, you insufficiently argued that coercion is taking place, you just assume they're talking about the enforcement of contract life.
So when you fail to live up to your end of a bargain in a contract, you can be sued for it. Maybe the person gets money damages. Maybe it's specific performance. Maybe they can seize some of your assets. It all depends.
Maybe they can kidnap or kill you. Oh, wait, is that only in your social contract? Is that the only contract that does that? Can Best Buy come and just lock me in a basement if I break my contract with them, allowing me to be raped every day by somebody else who broke a contract with them? No? Oh, that's odd.
In the particular case, one of the contracts at issue here is one with the government relating to taxes. What they ordinarily do is they send you letters and they give you penalties and whatnot, but if you get sufficiently in arrearage, they start seizing assets, and sometimes they prosecute people for various kinds of reasons.
And by prosecute, what you mean here is that they will send costumed people to your house to kidnap you, and were you to defend yourself against these costumed men in the same way that you would be perfectly justified and everybody would respect and honor in any other circumstance against any other group of people, were you to defend yourself against those costumed men in like fashion, then you will be shot, and nobody will think ill of the costumed men. Should they succeed, however, at kidnapping me, they will take me to a mediator, i.e. a government-operated court, where they will give their unbiased opinion on the conflict that took place between myself and the government. Maybe they're not an unbiased mediator.
That's understood to be how the system works when you get into it.
And when did I get into it? You still haven't told me that. Is it when I was born? When I was born into this society? Because I don't think that a 1-minute-old infant is of a reasonable age of consent in order to give informed and uncoerced consent to any contracts that can be considered binding on that infant. So, yeah.
And you are free not to get into it in the Fonzette Origo.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reveal my ignorance of legalese here. Did you just say in Fonzette Origo? If so, I'm left to assume that you are using terms of art, which you have not defined, in a video meant for a general audience. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to define that for me so I can speak on it intelligently. Thanks.
With respect to force, now, to give you the rebuttal to the previous video, you could have told me that you understand contracts and you know what you're talking about, and in one single word. Not a single one of you did this, to include a couple of you who I know have either been through law school or are currently in law school, and this just points up the fact of how deleterious to intellectual life ideology is.
Or that you poorly defined your argument and were misunderstood by all who were arguing in opposition to you, including those who had a background in contract law, which, frankly, I don't. But on top of this, I fail to see how it is that what I'm doing is ideological thought, and what you are doing is not. I mean, to be honest, I can't think of another political group that can all be summed up in one name that is less ideological than libertarians. Some of us accept as our first principle the non-aggression principle. Some, not all. And go from that first principle to arrive at what we think is the best system for governance. And most of us who do accept the non-aggression principle do have disagreements, and there are big debates over how things will work out. One thing I think most libertarians can agree on is that if you give the free market a chance to root out the best systems, it will. There is no other system that has ever been created that is as accountable to what a consumer wants as the free market. And anarcho-capitalists simply want to extend that power of accountability into the government. And frankly, when it comes to discussing government, I'm not sure why other people are so quick to completely deny an entire range of thought for debate. There are certain questions that cannot be asked, certain propositions that cannot be made or discussed or even explored without people having these hugely emotional responses, without their fear of all kinds of things, all kinds of boogeymen coming into play. You know, if you ask me, that sounds like an ideology. And that is exactly what you yourself have stood up here to defend. Why is it that you are unwilling to recognize that we allow the government to operate in an entirely different moral sphere of justification? The government is allowed to do all sorts of things which we as individuals are not allowed to do. And I'm not just saying things we're not allowed to do now, right? Because everybody's favorite argument is that we give up certain powers to the government, certain rights and freedoms to the government, and then they exercise those in our behalf, and this is for everyone's welfare. I'm talking about authorities and rights and freedoms which we were never considered to have, that in no possible universe could it be considered right for everyone to do these things, right? I can think of no other universe in which it would be accepted that one person would be able to tax another, unless you're talking about a moral universe in which might makes right. And do we really think such systems work to the best benefits and interest of all involved? We could go out to a full Hobbesian view of absolutism, and we'll end up in a system much like what we saw in the socialist regimes of the 20th century. Nothing but death and destruction, and misery, and then this wide gap between the peasants and the ruling class. Okay, so again, the government's allowed to do and act in all kinds of ways that we as individuals are not allowed to. And if the government ultimately gets its authority to act from us, the individuals it governs, then how can we possibly have given it authority to do things we ourselves cannot do on our own? Where does that authority come from? And why is it that as soon as somebody starts asking that question, everybody immediately loses their minds?
So, fairly straightforward concepts and contract law were laid out in that video. And all of the lawyer-type people, or law student-type people, completely missed what the response is. And it's unconscionability. This is different from force. This is different from a threat. Unconscionability arises when there is a disparity in the power of the bargaining parties. So if one party is so much more powerful than the other party, sometimes you can have terms and clauses or entire contracts thrown out because it shocks the conscience. That is, it's so outrageous that a reasonable person cannot be expected to assent to those terms, notwithstanding the fact that someone did agree to those terms.
Where and when did we agree to those terms? I feel like a broken record here, but you keep just assuming that it happened without ever demonstrating that it did.
There are a lot of doctrines in contract law, that cut against the strongest bargaining party. I've mentioned one of them in a previous video. It's contra proferentum, non-contra proferentum, which is a contract law cousin of the rule of lenity in criminal law. And what it essentially says is that if you're the strong bargaining party in a contract, you are uniquely situated to make sure that the terms and conditions of the contract are very clearly spelled out and there's not ambiguity in that contract.
Well, thanks for that one, because I can't think of anything more ambiguous or unclearly spelled out than a social contract that just supposedly exists somewhere. Now, if you want to discuss the possibility of the U.S. Constitution being that social contract, I'm happy to debate that one. I don't think anybody really has a leg to stand on to make that debate. But if you want to go down that line, then I'm happy to do so. But at some point, you need to show me where this social contract is and how I can go about understanding its terms and conditions.
If you don't do that, you don't get to benefit from not insisting upon that unambiguous statement. And the reason for this is just a practical one. If you're the strongest bargaining party, you're the one who generally gets to drive most of the terms and conditions in a contract. And because you are uniquely situated to do that, you don't get to fold into the contract ambiguity that later can be used against the person with whom you're contracting. You have to bargain in good faith, and part of that, part of doing that in an open, honest way is stating very clearly what you expect of the other person and what you'll provide for that other person. And if you fold into it ambiguity, you're going to be the losing party when you go to court. And that's for an obvious reason. You don't want the people writing the contract to be able to rig the game. So if you were a remotely smart anarcho-capitalist, which is something of a contradiction in terms, it seems to be, but anyway,
Somebody's poisoned the water hole.
you would have brought up.
I'm sorry you failed to predict where your opponents were going in this debate. I really am. But you can't sit here and continue to demand that a debate go in the direction you had prepared for. Sorry, you just can't.
The unconscionability argument that the state is so powerful by dint of being the maker of the law that there is this conscience problem in the contract. But that's a different matter from threats and violence. Those arise subsequent to the anterior agreement to the terms of the contract.
And how are we to determine if the threats and the violence came prior to the acceptance of a contract if you're unable to point out when we accepted the contract? We all acknowledge that the violence is there. You're going to say that it's there to enforce a contract already accepted. And I'm asking, when in the world did I accept this contract, and why should the and frankly, for you to prove your case, you not only have to point out that when and where I accepted this contract, but you have to be able to demonstrate that there was no coercion placed upon me up until the point I accepted this contract.
Those people who said, I didn't sign any contract. There are three ways you can enter into a contract, three major ways you can enter into a contract. Written is obviously one way to do it. You read it, sign your John Hancock to it, and bam, you're in a contract. Another one is oral, so verbal. Verbal means in writing or by speech, by words. So those are two ways. And then there's a third way, conduct. If something is just a custom that everyone understands, and you do certain actions, you are presumed to be consenting to the terms of that contract.
I perfectly understand the concept of implied contracts, and I'm perfectly happy to accept them as legitimate. But with this implied contract, there needs to be a certain point at which my action could be considered informed and uncoerced consent. Is there such a point in time in regards to my actions and my relationship with the government? If not, is it possible to enter into an implied contract passively, through inaction? And is this really a legitimate contract that we want to regard with any degree of respect in society? A contract where somebody can simply say, I have some obligation towards them because I did not act. If this is a legitimate form of contract, then I'm happy to open up a contract between yourself and myself, wherein if you do not move from your current location, from your current house, and quit your current job, then I am entitled to 15% of your income for the rest of your life, to be enforced with imprisonment or death. I'm openly declaring this contract and the terms thereof right now, actually in much more clear, concise, and understandable terms than any contract the government has ever handed over to me to give my consent to. And I'm I'm doing so right now. The means by which you may exit this contract are known by you now, or at least it's been publicly declared. The rest, sir, is up to you.
It's a presumption that can be overcome, but it's nevertheless a presumption that you're a rational person. You understood the obligations, you understood the benefits, that the process was not confusing to you. You kind of knew what you were getting.
Wait, are you saying that our current political situation is anything but confusing? Can you tell me just the number of laws that I have obligation to keep? Just the number. What's the number of laws that you are obligated to abide by? What's the number of regulations out there that businesses have to comply with? And then go ahead and point me to the single person, just one person, who understands the entire U.S. tax code.
And on that proviso, it's fair to assume that knowing that you knew, or presuming that you knew what the terms of it were going to be, you accepted those terms, and now you can be bound by them. And there's some you can get around that too. But anyway, just to cut this video short because I've got to get going. What you anarcho-capitalists should do, since contract law is extremely important to you, is bother to learn a little bit about it and stop making these stupid arguments.
You know, medicine's pretty important to us too. We should all become doctors. Oh man, yeah. The economy is important to us, so we should all become economists. Physics is important to us. We should all become physicists. Electricity is important, so we should all become electricians. Yeah. You know what else is important to us, Justicar? The division of labor. So I'm perfectly happy to sit back and let contract lawyers be contract lawyers. And I'll seek their expertise when and if I need it. And honestly, being an anarchist, I don't know that the current contract law network or system is something that should legitimately exist. Right? I think that the best type of law will be one that's found in a decentralized common law fashion. Now, I'm happy to start with what we have and let a free market decide what stays and what goes.
About the fact that there's an enforcement provision in the contract does not invalidate the contract. All right. Many of you probably won't do it because you're stupid, but
Somebody's poisoned the water hole.
anyway, have a great day.
You too. Well, I guess that's the end of his video, so that's the end of my video. If you liked it, then like it. Leave any comments below. And if you really loved it, please consider donating to keep these videos coming by becoming my patron on Patreon. Thanks. Bye.